The grand hall trembled with accusations as Amara Solari, her gown a cascade of ivory silk, stepped into the blinding chandelier light, her voice, long entombed, now a thunderclap that shattered the conspirators' illusions. Russian syllables danced with French elegance, exposing forged pacts and shadowed betrayals before a stunned assembly of nobles, her husband's fate hanging by the thread of her revelation. In that electrifying instant where trust teetered on the edge of ruin, the world remade itself around her unyielding gaze. If this unveiling seizes your breath, subscribe now, for the echoes of her words will reshape destinies in ways unimaginable. Amara's heart hammered like a war drum as the room erupted in chaos, guards seizing the pale-faced traitors while her husband, Lord Kale Vasari, stood beside her, his hand a silent anchor in the storm. No longer the purchased bride, she had become the architect of salvation, her multilingual prowess the key that unlocked chains she never knew bound them both. Yet as whispers of awe mingled with fear, a deeper peril loomed. The cost of her broken silence might demand more than either could pay. The rain lashed against the slate tiles of Eldridge Manor like accusations from the heavens, each drop echoing the clatter of silver coins, 10 pounds sterling, scattered across the scarred oak table. That was the worth assigned to Amara Solari, a transaction sealed in the dim glow of a single lantern, her fate bartered away without a whisper from her lips. To the world, she was the silent ward, a spectral figure with eyes that held oceans of unspoken tales, her voice locked behind walls built from years of betrayal and loss. In the shadowed parlor, her guardian, the venomous Elias Thorne, haggled with Lord Kale Vasari, a man whose chiseled features and storm-gray eyes betrayed a lineage of power shadowed by unspoken burdens. "She'll make a fine wife, quiet, obedient, no demands," Elias sneered, his fingers greedy on the coins. Kale nodded, his expression a mask of detachment, though Amara caught the flicker of reluctance in his gaze. He sought not companionship, but a remedy to an inheritance clause that demanded an heir, or all would crumble. Amara stood motionless, her puffed-sleeve gown whispering against the floor, the image of poised vulnerability. Internally, turmoil raged. She was no mute by birth, but by choice, a shield forged in the fires of her mother's untimely death and her father's abandonment. Born to a radiant Moroccan heiress and a wandering English envoy, she had roamed courts from Casablanca to St. Petersburg, absorbing tongues like sunlight, Arabic from bustling souks, French from elegant salons, German from stern academies, Italian from lyrical operas, Spanish from fiery debates, Latin from ancient tomes, and Greek from philosophical whispers. By adolescence, she navigated worlds invisible to others. But grief had silenced her. Her mother's fever in a distant villa, her father's curt dismissal, an encumbrance, and exile to Elias's grim household, where his leering kin prowled like wolves. Speech invited pain, silence granted invisibility. They confided freely around her, secrets spilling like wine, fueling her hidden knowledge. As the carriage rattled away from Elias's domain, Amara clutched a faded scarf infused with jasmine, her mother's essence, and a locket etched with forgotten scripts. Eldridge loomed ahead, its spires piercing the mist like forgotten promises. Servants gawked at the ragged newcomer, their new lady, but Kale's voice cut through. "You are free here. Expect nothing, demand nothing." His words held no malice, only a quiet void. Days blurred into exploration. Echoing corridors, a library thick with dust and forgotten lore. Whispers followed. The voiceless duchess, a pity. Amara let them linger, her silence a veil. Yet in the quiet she overheard Kale's aunt, stern Isolde. "No, wait, better," stern Nadia Vasari, murmuring of deadlines, legacies teetering on progeny. Kale had wed hastily to evade his father's tyrannical echo, fearing he'd inherit cruelty. Books appeared mysteriously, volumes on voiceless traumas healing through words. Kale sought understanding, unknowingly chipping at her armor. What hidden depths might shatter if she spoke? Comment below. What would you whisper in such shadows? Amara wandered Eldridge's labyrinthine halls, her footsteps soft echoes against marble veined like forgotten rivers. The manor breathed history, portraits of Vasari ancestors staring down with judgmental eyes, their legacies a weight Kale carried like an unseen chain. He avoided her mostly, his days consumed by ledgers and rides across fog-shrouded moors, but glimpses revealed a man fractured. Laughter absent, shoulders tensed against invisible foes. Her desires burned quietly, to reclaim the vibrancy of her youth, free from cages. Fears loomed larger. Vulnerability in voice, the twist of words into weapons. Relationships frayed in memory, her mother's warmth a ghost, her father's indifference a scar. Secrets nested deep, her linguistic arsenal, a power untapped, born from nomadic childhoods amid spice-scented bazaars and snow-laced palaces. Kale, too, harbored depths. Descended from a line of diplomats and conquerors, his father's brutality had withered his mother into silence, vowing he'd never repeat the cycle. His external poise masked an internal wound. Fear of becoming the monster he despised, hence the distant marriage. Yet curiosity drew him, leaving tomes on muted souls as if probing her enigma. One twilight, Amara found him in the conservatory, fingers tracing exotic blooms imported from distant lands. "These remind me of places I've only read about," he murmured, unaware she understood their origins intimately. Her heart stirred, his isolation mirrored hers. Subtle bonds formed through shared silences. Nadia, Kale's aunt, observed with wary approval, her own life a tapestry of lost loves and rigid duty. "He needs an heir, not affection," she confided once, thinking Amara deaf to nuance. But Amara heard, piecing puzzles. As autumn winds howled, an invitation arrived, a summit of envoys from across continents, where alliances teetered. Kale insisted she attend, adorned in finery that transformed her into ethereal grace. In the carriage, his hand brushed hers accidentally, a spark unspoken. Intrigue built, whispers of rivals eyeing Vasari holdings, their tongues loose in assumed privacy. Amara's fears clashed with budding hope. Could silence endure, or must she risk everything? The summit unfolded within the vaulted heart of a gilded palace, where chandeliers hung like captured constellations, scattering light into fractured stars across marble and gold. Every surface gleamed with excess meant to intimidate, polished floors reflecting silk-clad power, walls heavy with the portraits of rulers who had broken nations with softer smiles than these. Amara stood beside Kale, perfectly placed and perfectly dismissed. Her gown, a muted cascade of pearl silk, moved like breath against her skin, elegant but deliberately unremarkable. At Kale's side, she was assumed to be ornamentation, quiet, compliant, interchangeable. Dignitaries swirled around them in a controlled chaos, laughter spilling too loudly, goblets clinking as alliances pretended to be accidental encounters. The air buzzed with language. Arabic drifted past her first, low, confident murmurs threaded with menace. Delay the vote. Undermine the borders. Force concessions before winter. Spanish followed, sharp and animated, voices slipping into corners. Forge ancestral claims. His lands are vulnerable. No heir, no shield. French smoothed it all over with practiced diplomacy, while Greek, precise and dangerous, cut through like a blade, laying out numbers, bribes, and timelines with surgical clarity. They spoke freely. They always did. They believed her deaf to strategy, blind to ambition. A woman at a ruler's side was presumed decoration, something beautiful that absorbed nothing. They did not lower their voices. They did not guard their words. And so the truth flowed into Amara like converging rivers, forming a map she could not ignore. A consortium had aligned against Kale. 6 moons. That was the window. 6 months to exploit his heirless state, fracture loyalties, and bleed his estates through manufactured disputes and bought decrees. Not a war. Wars were messy and visible, but a slow dismantling disguised as legality. Her pulse quickened, not with fear but with resolve. This was no longer about Kale alone. It was about the fragile sanctuary she had found beside him, the quiet respect, the safety of anonymity, the rare kindness of being allowed to exist without explanation. If he fell, the world would remember her. And memory was dangerous. Nearby, voices rose, Greek envoys pressing their advantage, irritation bleeding through their refinement as they argued over who would move first, who would profit most. Names were spoken, routes mapped, Futures stolen aloud. That was when Amara made her decision. She reached out and gripped Kale's sleeve. The contact was small but deliberate. He stilled immediately, attuned to danger in ways few were. His brow furrowed as he turned toward her, subtly shifting his body to shield her from the crowd. "What is it?" he murmured, his voice low, calm, leading her toward an alcove draped in heavy velvet where candlelight faltered and shadows breathed. There, removed from the noise but not the threat, she hesitated. Years of silence pressed against her chest like armor suddenly too heavy to wear. Silence had kept her safe. Silence had erased her. But silence now would cost him everything. She lifted her gaze to his and spoke. "They scheme against you," she said softly. Her voice was melodic, steady, trained. In tongues they believe hidden. The effect was immediate. Kale froze. Shock rippled across his features, raw and unguarded. His gray eyes widened, searching her face as if seeing it for the first time. "You," his voice faltered. "You speak. Always could." A faint, almost rueful smile touched her lips. "I chose not to until now." She told him everything. The consortium. The forged claims. The 6-moon deadline. The names spoken too carelessly, the bribes whispered with confidence. Her words came precise and relentless, each detail clicking into place like pieces of a long-hidden puzzle. Kale listened without interruption, his disbelief giving way to something deeper. Respect, awe, and a dawning understanding of how blind he had been. When she finished, he exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath he'd been holding for years. "All this time," he said quietly, "you've been my unseen guardian." The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Something ignited in that narrow space. An alliance forged not by crown or contract, but by trust revealed in the shadows. A spark of something more followed close behind, dangerous and undeniable, born of shared secrecy and mutual recognition. But beneath it all, danger tightened its grip. Her voice, once revealed, could never be unheard. Speaking meant exposure. Exposure meant her past, carefully buried, could surface, dragging consequences neither of them had yet named. Still, she did not retreat. Emotional fire blazed where silence once lived. Shock gave way to strategy, to unity, to a bond neither had anticipated. Her voice had become a bridge across chasms, between power and perception, between who she was believed to be and who she truly was. And somewhere beyond the velvet curtains, the palace continued to glitter, unaware that the balance had just shifted. Secret rendezvous bloomed in the forgotten arteries of Eldridge, hidden alcoves behind tapestry-lined corridors, unused chapels where dust softened footsteps, narrow galleries overlooking courtyards no one remembered to guard. Dawn often found them there, pale light spilling through stained glass, painting Amara's face in fractured blues and golds as the world slept unaware. They worked relentlessly. Scrolls lay unfurled across stone tables, coded ledgers weighed down by daggers, maps inked and re-inked as theories rose and collapsed. Amara dissected the conspiracy with surgical clarity, tracing patterns others would miss. She taught Kale how language carried intent, how an Arabic inflection could signal urgency disguised as courtesy, how Italian phrasing shifted when deceit hid behind flattery. "Listen to the cadence," she instructed, her voice calm but intent. "Truth stumbles. Lies rehearse." Kale tried, awkwardly at first. His pronunciation mangled vowels, emphasis landing in all the wrong places. It earned him one of her rare smiles, small and unguarded, and he found himself attempting the phrases again just to see it return. But progress invited resistance. Forged missives were intercepted, letters bearing seals too perfect, promises too generous. Allies once trusted now bristled under scrutiny, their loyalties bending under pressure. Each revelation sharpened their focus, but also narrowed the circle of those they could rely on. As daylight faded, strategy gave way to something quieter. Evenings found them by the hearth, firelight softening the sharp edges of power and suspicion. Kale, uncharacteristically vulnerable, shared his mother's faded letters, ink blurred by time and neglect. Her pleas to be heard, her warnings ignored by a man too consumed by legacy to protect what mattered. "She saw it coming," he said once, staring into the flames. "And no one listened." Amara listened. In return, she offered fragments of herself, carefully, as though laying down glass. Stories of her mother dancing beneath Moroccan stars, silk skirts catching firelight, laughter ringing through open courtyards. Then the fever. The sudden quiet. A childhood ending without ceremony. Her father, an envoy by title and a ghost in practice, disappearing between borders and promises. Silence protected me, she admitted one night, voice barely above the crackle of embers. But it imprisoned me too. False trails tested them. A loyal servant accused, nearly broken before the truth surfaced. A decoy plot meticulously staged to pull them off course, buying the consortium precious time. Frustration mounted, tempers flared, but growth followed. Amara's confidence swelled, no longer shrinking from her own voice. Kale's defenses eroded, replaced by trust forged in shared labor and shared risk. Hope flickered in small moments. A stolen glance during lessons. Fingers lingering on a map longer than necessary. Silence that felt full rather than empty. Then the whispers sharpened. The consortium was growing bold. Too bold. A gala was announced, lavish, public, unavoidable. The timing was no coincidence. It would be their stage, their strike masked as celebration. As if summoned by the threat, the past reached for Amara. A letter arrived unmarked, deliberate. Elias. The name alone tightened her chest. Its contents were sparse but lethal, hinting at her heritage, her bloodline, the truth she had buried to survive. Exposure wasn't just possible now, it was imminent. The storm broke in the garden. Rain soaked the hedges, the stone paths slick and gleaming under lantern light. Kale found her there, breathless, the letter crushed in her hand. Without words, he pulled her close, grounding her in the present. "You've given me more than salvation," he said, rain streaking his hair, his voice fierce and certain. "You've given me purpose." Their first kiss was tentative, hesitant, almost fragile, then ignited, sudden and consuming, like kindling catching flame. For a moment, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, and the knowledge that neither of them stood alone anymore. But the stakes only rose. Betrayal hovered just out of reach. Clues slipped through their grasp. Arguments flared under pressure, sharp words born of fear rather than doubt. Emotional waves crashed, frustration colliding with hope, resolve forged in unity even as danger tightened its grip. Secrets could no longer remain untouched. And the question lingered, unspoken but undeniable. How much of yourself would you risk for a bond that could cost you everything? Because in Eldridge, truth was never free, and love, once awakened, demanded a price. The gala unfolded like a jeweled illusion. Crystal goblets chimed in delicate harmony, chandeliers scattering light across marble floors as if the palace itself were celebrating. Silk gowns whispered secrets as they passed. Laughter bloomed too easily, too smoothly. Beneath the waltzes and bows, venom circulated with practiced grace. Amara moved through it all like a shadow stitched in gold. She listened. Arabic curled softly behind politeness near the balconies, phrases about leverage and deadlines. French masked threat as etiquette. Spanish murmured of legal traps hidden within ceremonial decrees. Each language braided into a single, tightening noose. Then she heard it, the truth that shifted everything. A name spoken with reverence and resentment. Kale's cousin. Blood of his blood. The cabal's architect was not some distant consortium head, but family, envy sharpened into strategy. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Documents prepared to nullify Kale's inheritance unless an heir could be produced within an impossibly short span. No heir, no claim. No claim, no protection. The waltz continued as Amara's pulse thundered. Beliefs shattered behind closed doors. Kale's confrontation came in a storm-lit chamber, thunder echoing his rage. Rain lashed the windows as if the sky itself condemned the betrayal. His voice cracked, not with fury alone but grief. "Blood means nothing now." The words fell heavy, final. Amara stood before him, her own walls fracturing. This was the precipice she had feared, the moment silence could no longer shield her. She revealed everything. The full breadth of her linguistic legacy. The forbidden scroll passed through her mother's line, inked in dialects erased from courts and censored by decree. knowledge that could unravel the conspiracy or expose her heritage to those who would erase it. Aid or doom balanced on the same blade. The stakes exploded outward. The consortium's reach extended beyond Eldridge, brushing royal courts and sovereign councils. Exile loomed. Arrest. Erasure. Every choice now echoed beyond love into legacy. In the aftermath, passion and pain tangled inseparably. Cale confessed in a voice stripped bare. His vow, to never coerce, never trap, never repeat his father's sins. The truth he had buried until now. I wed you to spare you, he whispered. Not to bind you. The words cut deeper than betrayal. Amara's heart tore in two directions, hurt and understanding, fear and devotion. Tears burned, but resolve hardened. She stepped into him, grounding them both. We faced this together. Their embrace became a refuge amid chaos. Two souls choosing unity over fear, trust over bloodlines. Betrayal still stung, sharp and unforgettable. But something fiercer rose from it. Passion forged by truth, loyalty born not of obligation, but choice. The gala had promised celebration. Instead, it marked the point of no return. From this moment on, love was no longer a risk. It was a declaration. The fall was swift. Agents loyal to the cousins swept through Eldridge at dawn, boots echoing through corridors that had once felt like sanctuary. Doors were forced. Drawers emptied. Scrolls seized and replaced with forgeries. Truth was dismantled piece by piece, repackaged as treason. By nightfall, Amara was no longer an ally. She was an accusation. They took her to the tower room, the old one, never used unless someone was meant to be forgotten. Stone walls swallowed sound. The narrow window framed only sky, too high to offer escape, too small to offer comfort. Cold iron bars cut the light into fragments. Foreign spy. The words followed her like a brand. Every artifact she had guarded was gone. Every proof she had uncovered erased or twisted. Documents bearing her name, her languages, her mother's lineage, now told a different story. One of sedition. One of infiltration. Below, Eldridge turned against her in whispers. Cale stood at the center of the storm, and faltered. Planted doubts worked with cruel precision. Half-truths. Fabricated correspondences. A narrative designed to wound where he was already raw. His Aunt Nadia's voice carried reason sharpened into warning. Think carefully, she urged. If this is true, loving her could cost you everything. For the first time, he hesitated. And Amara felt it, like a door quietly closing. Alone in the tower, fears long buried clawed back to life. The echo of abandonment she had outrun since childhood returned with teeth. Her voice, once her salvation, now felt like the weapon used against her. Silence had protected her once. Speaking had destroyed her. Letters arrived, deliberate, cruel. From her past. From names she had fled. They painted her heritage as conspiracy, her mother's legacy as subversion, her father's absence as evidence of treachery. Ink twisted memory into menace. Truth bent until it snapped. You're alone again, the shadows whispered. She tried to fight. Signals slipped through the bars, coded taps, folded notes hidden in laundry seams, phrases only Cale would recognize. Each attempt failed. Guards had changed. Their eyes no longer softened. Loyalty had been purchased. Desperation clawed her throat. Hope thinned to threads. In the quiet hours before dawn, the weight finally crushed her. Tears came, hot, unchecked, the kind she had not allowed herself since she was small, and no one came when she cried. Her chest ached with questions she could no longer silence. Was the bargain a lie? Had revealing herself been a mistake? Was love ever real? Or just another illusion she had dared to believe in? In that abyss, stripped of allies, voice weaponized against her, identity turned into evidence, Amara faced the cruelest truth of all. Courage does not guarantee salvation. And love, when tested by power, often breaks first. The tower held its breath. So did she. Strength did not arrive like thunder. It came quietly, in the stillness between breaths. Amara sat with the ancient tome Cale had once left in her keeping. The one dismissed as ceremonial, its margins dense with obsolete dialects and devotional symbols. She had overlooked it before, grief blurring instinct. Now, with nothing left to lose, she listened again. And the book spoke. Not in words alone, but in patterns. In pauses. In ink that darkened only when the page was tilted toward moonlight. Her pulse quickened as meaning unfolded. Phrases nested inside prayers. Warnings hidden in praise. Cale's hand had been careful, deliberate. A message meant only for her. His doubt had been too precise. His distance staged. His hesitation calculated. He had been playing the fool to draw the traitors into light. Hope flared, fragile but fierce. She moved with renewed purpose, tracing memory through stone. Eldridge still remembered her. A loose panel. A stair that curved when it should not. Secret passages once built for queens fleeing judgment opened to her touch. The tower released her like a held breath. Moonlight spilled across the stables when she emerged, silvering dust and horsehair. Cale stood there, waiting, cloak cast aside, tension etched into every line of him. For a heartbeat neither spoke. Then she ran. Their embrace was not gentle. It was desperate, grounding, real. Proof that the abyss had not swallowed them whole. "I knew," she breathed. "You never truly doubted." His hands framed her face, reverent. "Your silence taught me how to listen. I trusted that." The words settled between them like a vow. They did not pretend the danger had passed. Exposure loomed, the assembly drawing near, eyes sharp, knives hidden behind courtesy. Survival would require a leap with no retreat. "We end this in the open," Cale said. "No more shadows." Amara nodded. "Then everything I am will be seen." It was an irreversible choice. But fear no longer ruled. Hope surged, not naive but earned. Courage bloomed where despair had scorched the earth. Together, they prepared to step into the fire, united not by secrecy but by truth. The night bore witness. And dawn waited. The assembly hall breathed like a living thing. Vaulted ceilings arched high above the gathered nobles, banners hanging heavy with centuries of power, their sigils watching as if expectant. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, anticipation sharpened by rumor, by the sense that something long restrained was about to break. Amara and Cale stepped forward together. No herald announced them. They did not need one. When Amara spoke, the hall stilled. Her voice carried first in Arabic, precise, unyielding, naming dates, routes, and sums whispered in back rooms. Heads turned sharply as recognition flickered across faces that had believed themselves unseen. Without pause, she shifted into French, laying out contracts and forged accords, her cadence elegant but merciless. Gasps rose as comprehension spread, disbelief giving way to alarm. Then Greek, older, sharper. Condemnation framed in legal precedent and ancestral law. There was nowhere left to hide. The cousin's face drained of color. Laughter broke out once, brittle and false, quickly smothered by the weight of evidence cascading across the hall. Scrolls were unfurled. Seals examined. The room erupted, voices overlapping, alliances fracturing in real time. A loyal envoy stepped forward, trembling but resolute, confirming the plot with testimony that cut through denial like a blade. When Amara raised her mother's scroll, the chamber fell silent again. Its markings glowed faintly under the chandeliers, revealing alterations only the initiated could read. Proof of forgery so absolute it shattered the last defenses. The cousin lunged. Desperation stripped him of decorum, a concealed dagger flashing as he rushed Cale. Steel rang out as Cale disarmed him in a swift, practiced motion, the weapon skidding across marble. Guards surged forward, seizing the traitor as he screamed accusations that no longer held power. Through it all, Amara did not falter. She stood beside Cale, their shoulders aligned, their resolve unmistakable. The reckoning thundered through the hall. Orders were shouted. Arrests made. The cabal collapsed under the weight of exposure, their reach severed in moments that would echo through history. Cale's legacy stood secure, not by blood alone, but by truth hard-won and fiercely defended. When silence finally returned, it was different. Heavier. Cleansed. Cale turned to Amara, emotion breaking through restraint. Relief washed over him, raw and unguarded. She met his gaze, her own triumph quieter but deeper. Years of silence transformed into a voice that had reshaped fate. Together they stood victorious. Not unscarred. but unbroken. Spring arrived at Eldridge not with haste, but with intention. It crept along the stone corridors and over the battlements, softening the severity of winter's rain. Frost loosened its grip on the gardens, giving way to tender green shoots that pressed upward as though answering a call older than the estate itself. Blossoms unfurled in patient confidence, white pale gold blush, each petal catching light like a promise kept. The land was healing. So were they. Amara stood at the balcony overlooking the eastern gardens, morning light weaving through her dark hair as the breeze lifted loose strands around her face. Her hands rested on the stone rail, steady now, no longer tentative. Once, she had watched the world from edges and alcoves, believing herself safest unseen. Now she stood openly, belonging not just to the place, but to herself. Behind her, Eldridge stirred awake. Cale moved quietly, as he always had, but there was no distance in his steps anymore. He joined her at the balcony without words, his presence warm and grounding. They watched the gardeners below tend the soil, their laughter drifting upward, unafraid. "Peace looks different than I imagined," he said at last. Amara smiled. "It's quieter, but deeper." He turned to her then, studying her as though committing the moment to memory. In the months since the assembly, he had learned to look without fear, without the armor of suspicion and restraint inherited from generations before him. She had taught him that too. The echoes of betrayal had faded, but not been erased. The cousin's downfall had sent tremors through noble circles far beyond Eldridge. Alliances shifted, power recalibrated. Yet rather than isolating Cale, the truth had strengthened his standing. Rulers respected transparency forged in fire. And Amara, once dismissed as silent ornament, had become a figure spoken of in reverent tones. The reconciliation with Nadia came slowly. At first, it was careful, brittle as frost-laced glass. The woman who had urged caution, who had planted doubt in Cale's mind during the darkest hour, carried her own scars. Guilt weighed heavily on her, sharpened by the realization that fear had nearly cost them everything. It was Amara who bridged the divide. Not with accusation, with understanding. They met one afternoon in the solar, sunlight painting the room in amber hues. Nadia spoke of her youth, of watching her own sister destroyed by court politics, of vows made to never be naive again. Amara listened, not as a defendant but as a witness. "You tried to protect him," Amara said gently, "even if it hurt." Nadia wept then, the sound raw and unguarded. When she reached for Amara's hands, it was not as an aunt to a consort, but as one woman to another. From that day forward, Nadia became an ally not of necessity, but of choice. Amara's heritage, once a liability, became a bridge. Envoys arrived not with veiled threats, but with respect. The languages she commanded, once weapons hidden in silence, were now tools of diplomacy. Treaties were strengthened through nuance others had missed. Alliances formed where conflict once festered. The forbidden scroll was no longer forbidden. It was honored. A new wing of Eldridge's library was established, dedicated to linguistic preservation and cross-cultural scholarship. Amara oversaw it herself, her hands tracing spines instead of stone walls. Students came from distant regions, drawn by stories of the woman whose voice had undone a conspiracy. She taught them joyfully, not as penance, as freedom. Evenings were slower now. Cale no longer slept with one ear turned toward danger. Letters from the realm spoke of stability, of progress. The weight he had carried since boyhood lifted incrementally, replaced by something unfamiliar and precious: ease. They would sit by the hearth, sharing small moments that once felt impossible. She teased him over mispronounced vowels. He listened as she recounted memories of her mother, dancing beneath Moroccan stars, laughter ringing through warm nights. "She would have loved you," Amara said once. Cale believed her. When Amara told him she was with child, the world seemed to still. Not with fear, with awe. He knelt before her, hands trembling as they rested against her abdomen, as though afraid the miracle might vanish if acknowledged too loudly. His voice broke when he whispered her mother's name, the name they had already chosen together. Renewal, not replacement. Legacy continued, not imposed. The child would be born into truth, not silence. Years passed, woven gently. The estate flourished, reflecting its stewards. Festivals returned, lighter than before, laughter no longer edged with caution. Amara's voice became a familiar sound in halls once echoing with conspiracy, clear, confident, warm. Legends began quietly. They spoke of a bride who entered a noble house without words and left it transformed. Of a woman who weaponized listening and turned silence into power. Of love that did not demand erasure, but revelation. Amara and Kale did not correct the stories. They lived instead, in shared whispers at dawn, in knowing glances across crowded rooms, in the steady knowledge that what they built was not perfect, but real. Hope endured, not as an abstract promise, but as a lived truth. And Eldridge, once a fortress of secrets, became a home where voices mattered. Even the ones that had waited the longest to be heard.